We start with the battle over the budget. Time Magazine's Mark Halperin is an MSNBC senior political analyst, and Richard Wolffe is an MSNBC political analyst, and he joins me now, a seatmate usually over at the White House. And we got Mark over at the White House. So, Mark, I'll start with you over there. When you look at the numbers, Vice President Biden told reporters last night, quote, "There is no reason why we can't reach an agreement to avoid a government shutdown because the bottom line is we're working off the same number." That number, Mark Halperin, is $33 billion. Now, House Speaker John Boehner said today they weren't operating off that number, but let's put this number in perspective. The original Paul Ryan proposal was $32 billion. Biden is saying $33 billion, and of course the current House number is $61 billion. It's a game of chicken. Democrats keep caving, but is it now all eyes on the Republicans?
Well, I think they're caving less on the question of the amount, although they have caved somewhat on that. The bigger caves are tax increases aren't on the table, something a lot of Democrats would like to see, and they're digging right deep into the discretionary, non-defense discretionary spending that Democrats think will hurt the economy and hurt less fortunate Americans. So they've lost the PR battle on the terrain, and now they're giving inch by inch on the actual number.
But for the first time, Richard Wolffe, we actually did see at least the White House try to play the PR game. Last night, Joe Biden goes out there and says, hey, we're working off the same number. And it led to this today. John Boehner had to say this. Take a listen.
Now, here's the bottom line. Democrats are rooting for a government shutdown. We're listening to the people who sent us here to cut spending so we can grow our economy. There is no agreement on a set of numbers, and nothing will be agreed to until everything's agreed to. I've said it, and I'm going to continue to say it because that is the fact.
So, Richard Wolffe, they got John Boehner to say there's no agreement. That's actually something they've been trying to get him to do because now it looks like he's standing in the way of a deal.
Right. Here's the different dynamic. The White House is playing for independence. It wants to be reasonable, look reasonable, no matter what the number is, and that's going to annoy the base because they're giving up too much. They are caving to a greater degree than Republicans. But the Republicans are not playing for that same group. They're playing the bodybuilding game for their base, for the Tea Party folks. And so when you've got one side wanting to look tough and the other side looking reasonable, well, you know who wins that argument in the short run. That's the number game. But the bigger game that the White House is playing, the bigger audience, is those independent voters that moved away from them in the last couple of years. So, yes, this is a small skirmish over this particular phase, and maybe Democrats are going to have to be very unhappy because they've given up so much here. The problem here is the next round. What now can the White House do when they go into the spending limits, the next budget?
Right.
What else can they give up here and still look reasonable?
And, you know, Mark Halperin, what I found fascinating today is this contradiction between what Biden said last night and Boehner said today. It was all fodder for the Jay Carney briefing. And Jay Carney said, oh, no, we agree with John Boehner. We know that when you have a deal, it's a deal for all of it. We just think that we all agree we're pretty close on the number. We're just working out the details. The White House doesn't want to throw John Boehner under the bus publicly, do they?
He's their negotiating partner, and Boehner has been in private in these talks, from all reports, pretty reasonable, and he recognizes that he has a balancing act to do. He must get support from some Republicans, but in the end, this deal is likely to be like the tax deal that passed during the lame duck session and like the last CR was. This is likely to be a deal that gets passed only because it gets sufficient votes from both Republicans and Democrats, the kind of bipartisan compromise that the president said he would put through on a range of issues as president. This is a challenge for John Boehner more than anyone else, but it's clear he knows from the comments he made today he can't deliver what the Tea Party wants. Even if he wanted to, even if he was willing to take the political risks Richard was talking about, he can't deliver that because it can't pass the Senate.
And Mark Halperin, very quickly, do you imagine a deal where John Boehner votes for it and Eric Cantor, the number 2, votes against it, where there's a little bit of a split there?
I think that's absolutely possible, and it would be representative of the two strands of thought and strategic thought within the party right now.
Richard Wolffe, I want to play some back and forth that there was over this issue of riders. So the White House actually has backed off of some of it. They've now drawn a line, I think, in the air. Biden last night, these amendments, these riders, this is the defunding of Planned Parenthood, for instance, defunding of NPR. This is what Biden said last night. The president and I are not really big on riders at all. We've made it clear that we think they are the non-starters, both the numbers and riders, but I'm not going to negotiate out here. He didn't draw a line in the sand. Here's Michelle Bachmann today about this issue of riders. Take a listen.
funding to groups like Planned Parenthood has to be one of those issues that we're just not going to back down from.
So it seems the White House is basically saying, look, John Boehner, we'll give you some riders if you need it. You just can't send us over the Planned Parenthood and NPR riders.
Right. I think there are some red lines around this. They're not saying explicitly which riders are the worst for them, but all of them are going to be difficult to swallow. And in this kind of negotiation, what you give up, the problem is they've already given up their number. and they're trying to look reasonable. They've already had to move with the goalposts as they've moved with the Republicans. I don't know that there are many of those riders that the base will accept for the Democrats. So, to give up one and maybe get a less in terms of cuts to some of these discretionary spending programs, maybe that's a compromise that they'll take. But they're really looking for that next game, which is what do you do on the next round of cuts? This is not, the Republicans are not going to stop here with a couple of riders. This is just a temporary point right now.
Mark Halperin, Newt Gingrich was speaking today to the House Republican freshmen, right? And these is a group that, for the most part, they want to fight a little bit harder, it seems, than the leadership. You get a sense the Republican leadership says, hey, we have a debt limit fight we got to do, all these extra fights that Richard Wolffe was just pointing out. What advice was Newt Gingrich, or what do we think the advice Newt Gingrich, who went through this before in the 90s, was given to these freshmen?
To stand by their principles. This is the popular position, and anyone who's thinking of running for president, you talked before about perhaps Eric Cantor being against a final deal, but John Boehner being for it. I can almost guarantee you that every Republican presidential candidate, like Newt Gingrich, is going to be against it. They're going to side with the Tea Party, with the base of the party, and say this deal isn't good enough. We need to fight for more. The reality is, though, again, the shutdown risk that Gingrich might be willing to take, even though he says he's not for a shutdown, he might be willing to take it. I don't think John Boehner wants it. I know the president doesn't want it. They would prefer to avoid that shutdown, avoid the risk that comes, both substantive and political, with taking that on, going into the unknown.
What's the likelihood of a shutdown? I mean, it seems as if, the leadership doesn't want it, but is there a point of no return?
No, 8 out of 10 voters don't want it. If the leadership wanted to go down the shutdown route, they'd have done it already. So I think we're beyond that point now.
That's sort of the question. That's the cable catnip game.
Yeah, and also, look, I think Republicans are playing quite a clever game here in saying Democrats want the shutdown. They have the Schumer stuff. Everyone's trying to make each other look unreasonable. But Boehner's compromise with the Tea Party folks is not that different from what Pelosi had to do in terms of holding on to her group and saying, I'm fighting as hard as I can. If I have to lose some people and they look like they've pushed me as hard as they can go, it works out for everyone.
I had somebody say he needs the theatrics a little bit.
He does, and also some of the Tea Party folks can need to vote against this.
Very quickly, Mark.
Chuck, we could have a shutdown because remember, in these budget things, particularly when you need votes from both the Democratic pot and the Republican pot of votes, you go to the floor without the votes. The leadership might say, yeah, we got a deal, but that doesn't mean you get to the majority on the floor.
Look at the original TARP vote. Anyway,
that's right.
Mark Halperin, Richard Wolffe, MSNBC contributors, both of you. Thanks very much. Mark, at the White House, Richard here. I'm very confused. Anyway, thank you both.